Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lillian Abreu, Research Associate and Program Officer for the Lillian Lodge Kopenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Leadership Webinar Series of the Kopenhaver Center. The mission of our center is to empower young women professionals and academics in all the fields of communication to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their professions and in their communications. Nathalia Ortiz began her career as an intern at Univision Network in Miami in 2000. She parlayed that into a steady position as production assistant for a national dance and music show called Caliente, all while attending Florida International University, where she received her BS in communications with a concentration in broadcasting journalism. She earned Employee of the Year award after the first year at Univision, and eventually became one of the main producers for coordinating national and international productions. In 2005, she became part of one of Univision's special events departments, where she was entrusted with essential aspects of live events, including Univision's premiere award show, where she was part of the original production team. In 2006, she became the weekend reporter for WLTV, Univision's local station in Miami. There she covered events such as President Bush's visit to Miami and issues regarding Cuban political affairs, local crimes, and politics. In late 2008, she moved to New York City to report for News 12 and shortly after joined NET, the Catholic cable channel of the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens, as a reporter and fill-in co-anchor of Currents. In 2011, Nathalia created the Hispanic Media Department for the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens and led the launch of Spanish language, print, and digital entities as part of an initiative to serve the Catholic Hispanic community in Greater New York City. At the end of 2012, Nathalia joined Telemundo Nueva York as co-anchor of the new morning show, co-hosting a live show on a daily basis covering topics including health, wellness, technology, cooking, politics, and community affairs. She later served as a general assignment reporter for Telemundo's 47 morning newscast, and then decided to return to her hometown, Miami, where she currently works as a reporter for WSTV Telemundo 51. Everyone, join me in welcoming Nathalia Ortiz, a proud FIU alum.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I was sitting in your seats, not literally those same seats, but some years ago, and I'm very proud to be an FIU graduate for the School of Journalism. Let me get set up here before we begin. So basically, this session was created because I find that as a bilingual person in general, and as a journalist, there are many things I've learned along the way, and I've wanted to share some of those things with other people in hopes that, you know, along the way, I guess I've had some moments where I wish somebody would have told me that before, right? And so I thought, well, why not create something that other people can learn from, and also maybe, you know, spare you some decisions that you might have done otherwise, right? So the title is Being a Bilingual Journalist in the US, Benefits and Challenges. Later on, I decided maybe that was not the correct title because it's really just how to and what to expect. But I left it like that because that's how we promote it. And I figured there are some benefits and challenges, and we will go over that. I also want to emphasize this is regarding bilingual. When I talk bilingual, I mean Spanish-English bilingual. So if there are any of you that are bilingual in other combinations of languages, there also may be some things you can gather from this. But I'm specifically referring to the Spanish-English dynamic, which is obviously so common here in South Florida. So what is a fully bilingual journalist? A fully bilingual broadcast or digital journalist, and that's the other thing I want to point out, is we are talking specifically about broadcast and digital journalism, although you may also be able to glean something from this if you were in print or if you're focusing on another area of communications. It's someone who is capable of ad-libbing, translating live, and reporting breaking news in 2 languages and in a fashion that is grammatically correct. That is what I consider, and this is all based on my own experience. This is not gospel, but it is, again, what I have encountered and what I feel is the definition of a fully bilingual broadcast or digital journalist. And so you might be asking yourself, well, am I a fully bilingual journalist? Well, you know, growing up in South Florida, most of us, many of us, I don't know the percentage, but are very bilingual to different degrees. And what happens is that when we become journalists, or if we work in PR and we have to write a press release in another language, then that's when you really figure out how bilingual you are. Because it's not the same to be able to communicate with your grandmother, right? Than to have, you know, a breaking news situation happen before your eyes and have to ad-lib with very little preparation, and to be able to do it in a way that is grammatically correct, and that you have a broad vocabulary to choose from in your toolbox. So what is the litmus test? Because this is something that I always kind of like think about. Well, so what do I tell people? A lot of people say, well, I know Spanish, you know, especially people that are from outside South Florida who are bilingual to lesser degrees, usually. And they'll say, well, you know, I've been thinking, you know, journalists as yourselves who are in school, I've been thinking maybe I can start off in Spanish language media, but I can sort of feel like in hearing some of their conversation in Spanish that maybe that they're not ready, or they're not really fully comfortable speaking in Spanish in a live environment on television. So I would say, and this is just, like I said, my own little litmus test that I make up. If you can translate words like alcohol test, mortgage, bombing without looking it up, right? And if you know how to say that in Spanish off the top of your head, then you are probably sufficiently bilingual that you can do news in Spanish. Can you translate a press conference live? Something that just happened. For example, I was able to translate live the announcement of the death of Marlins pitcher Jose Fernandez about a year ago. Again, something that I don't have time to prepare in advance, to show to somebody, to get it proofread, right? It was happening, the Marlins called a press conference, I was the reporter on duty, and so guess what? The press conference is in English. And our channel, the one I freelance with, I'm at Telemundo, and I'm also on NBC, but this particular day I was on Telemundo 51, and so I was the only reporter who was able to translate live in the moment what the Marlins were saying. I'm gonna show you just a piece of that, and you're gonna hear me kind of whispering because I was around other people and I couldn't fully speak completely loud. Hold on, why is this not? Do you know, yeah. Let's see. There it is. Yeah.
¿Cómo están? Muy buenas tardes. Mientras ustedes siguen viendo en un costado de la pantalla el partido que disfrutaban de la Liga Inglesa, vamos a tomar contacto ya con Nathalia Ortiz, nuestra compañera de trabajo que está justamente en el estadio de los Marlins por la muerte de José Fernández. Vamos a escuchar la conferencia de prensa y lo que Nathalia nos está contando.
Así que jugaremos mañana. También les dejamos saber a los Braves. Ya estuvimos en contacto con el comisionado y el equipo de los Braves. Y el comisionado y ellos enviaron también sus oraciones.
So, because of the technical difficulties, we're just going to leave it there. But I think you get the gist of it. I hope you're able to sufficiently hear what was going on. The Marlins person, the PR person, whoever, was telling us what was going on. And in the moment, I was translating it for our audience who speaks Spanish predominantly. That's a skill set that is hard to acquire, but it is possible. And it's like a muscle that you develop throughout time. I was not always that bilingual. And so that leads me also to another point. Let's see. So, U.S. bilingual journalist roadmap. So this is sort of the how-to if you feel like you are bilingual or bilingual enough to take that step and become a journalist who may be able to work in both the Spanish language market and the English language market. You need to identify what your primary language is. In other words, what language do you think in? And that's a question many of us don't really think about or ask ourselves because it's just kind of automatic. But it became very present to me as I was starting off my career in Spanish language media that I thought, or I think still, in English because I'm native-born US person of Hispanic parents, and so we speak a lot of Spanish in the home, and because of that I'm fluent enough in Spanish that I can work in Spanish media. However, if you ask me what my primary language is, it will always be English. And that's nothing to be scared of or ashamed of. It's just something that is, and you need to be aware of that so you can figure out what you want to do with that and how you can use that to your advantage or not. So decide what language you want to work in primarily. And if it's English, well, then that's fine. I suggest for people who want to work in both languages that you create 2 demo reels. You create one in just English and one in just Spanish. That way, when you start looking for jobs after graduation, you can tailor it. You can take the English language one to those specific interviews and vice versa. I would suggest, and again, just based on my experience, that you first work in the language you want to work in primarily for 2 to 3 years. Why? Because you want to establish yourself in your career as soon as possible. And if you decide that long-term and your primary language and the one you want to really grow in is, let's say, English, my advice is to start there for 2-3 years, and then you can pick up a job in your alternate language, which in this case we're talking about Spanish. Why? Because a lot of times, and this is just a reality, and it was my experience, it won't necessarily be yours. Everybody has a different path. And perhaps you'll talk to other journalists who will say, you know what, that wasn't my situation. But in my case, I feel like news directors often, they see you as one language, and then it's hard for them to imagine you can do the other, even if they see a demo reel with that other language. And they can see you, and they can obviously see in an interview you can speak both languages. But it's sort of like they pigeonhole you or they typecast you, not to use an actor's term, but it's kind of that way. And so there are also stylistic differences in the writing and in your tone and in your delivery. So all of those things are things that you take with you, and that's not a bad thing to have. Again, it's just you need to adjust with one audience and with the other. So sometimes news directors have a hard time knowing and believing that you can adjust, because it is an adjustment. It's not just an adjustment of language, it's an adjustment of how you write, of how you deliver, of your body language, of your tone, right? So that's what I would suggest. To immerse yourself in a secondary language or culture by traveling, by surrounding yourself with people, which here in South Florida it's very easy, right? Because there are people that are from other parts of Latin America, all parts of Latin America, all over the place, and who are native Spanish speakers. So here it's a little easier than perhaps if you were, say, I don't know, California, even though there is a large Mexican population there. But I still think that it's important not just to surround yourself with people who are bilingual as you are bilingual, but with people who only speak that other language, in Spanish, for example. TV, books, newspapers in that other language, in Spanish, are essential to growing your vocabulary. And this is part of the roadmap. Why? Because I wasn't always as bilingual as I am now. I had to really work hard at it. And my mother will attest, who's sitting right here, who came with me today. She will attest, she will attest to the many times when I was starting out at Univision 23 here in South Florida as a weekend reporter, where I couldn't think of the word because it's something that's outside of your normal vocabulary every day with your parents and in your home. And then I had to call her up and carry a little dictionary with me and be panicked that, am I saying this right? And am I doing this right? And am I going to make it time to air with all these, different questions I have? And it's a reality. And so at first it may be daunting, and you may choose not to do it at all. And that's okay too. If you want to stick to your, primary language, there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously there are double the job opportunities. And let's face it, as a Hispanic population here in the United States, we are viewed as the next biggest, or we are the largest minority in the country, and the next big thing always, it's very trendy now to be Hispanic, right? So it's a good thing to bring in with you at a job interview, the fact that you can speak a second language. So there's that. The subcultures, which we all know, again, being in South Florida, we know that Spanish isn't just a language, but there's a culture attached to speaking Spanish. And it may be different to speak Spanish the way Cubans speak Spanish than the way Colombians speak Spanish, Argentinians, Spaniards, and so on and so forth. And then on top of all of those vocabulary differences, there are also other things that go with that, like phrasing, and things you shouldn't say in one language because it's misinterpreted. Maybe that same word doesn't mean the same thing in another country, even though it's still Spanish. So those are all things that again, as a bilingual journalist, you need to be aware of and you need to learn, and the best way to learn them is to surround yourself with friends, people, movies, books, anything you can that can teach you that. Again, history, politics, religious background, all those things have to do because when you're a journalist, especially if you're a general assignment journalist like myself, I don't have a beat. I don't cover just one thing. At some point, maybe I'll decide to go into that and delve deep into become a religion reporter or become politics reporter. But at this point, my story could be anything. It could be a political story. It could be something based on religion. You know, when Fidel Castro died, there was a perfect example. You would never think, right? You think, well, this is going to be a straight political story. We did continuing coverage on that for like 4 days. And the last day of the coverage was actually at La Ermita de la Caridad, which is a very famous Catholic church in Coconut Grove. And there was a mass there said for a lot of the Cuban people. And so there were some religious elements to that reporting that day. So if I'm not familiar with the fact that many Cubans who came from Cuba, back when Cuba, especially before the revolution, or right after the revolution started, came with a Catholic faith versus the Cubans who are coming recently who perhaps grew up atheists or without any kind of faith or that kind of education, you know, those are things that if I'm not familiar with, I'm not going to know how to report on. So even that is a subculture within a subculture of the Cuban, for example, culture. So cultural neutralization, that's kind of, again, my opinion. Some people feel like they have to become very neutral, that their Spanish has to be very neutral. I have I would say, relatively neutral accent when I speak in Spanish versus Colombian. My father is Colombian, my mother is Cuban, so that kind of leaves me sort of in the middle, which is why I don't want anybody to get mad. But it's also because I feel like it might appeal to a larger audience and people can understand you more than if you have a little bit more of an accent. That's not to say, though, that accents are bad. And if you have an accent because you're from an Argentinian family and they speak a certain way, that you have to completely whitewash that. I don't think that that's the right way to go about it either. I think that you have to be authentic to who you are. And if that feels natural to you, then you should stick to it. There are things, the other thing I want to emphasize is that these are sort of just guideposts. There's nothing really set in stone here. This is an art. And so there are some things that may work for me that don't work for you, and vice versa. And so this is just, again, something that I recommend, but it's not necessarily like this is black and white. You know, it's kind of like, you need to also pick your battles. And so there are a lot of things you will negotiate about how you deliver news to an audience, and that's one of those things you might have to negotiate and decide on at some point. So is it double the work? Sometimes, right now, I'm at a duopoly. It's what we call a duopoly. Our station is Telemundo and NBC combined in the same building, and we share a lot of resources. In fact, we share an assignment desk, even though we have two different teams. They're all sitting together and they often, communicate with each other, and we, negotiate as well. Are you going to send your reporter here and then I'll send mine there and we'll swap material, blah, 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 right? So a lot of the times as a fully bilingual, one of the few people that are there that can do both stations, I find myself like doing double the work, depending on the story. And so it's a case-by-case basis, and I'm going to show you some stories coming up next, and examples of some stories that you can do a direct translation of. And then there are others where you literally have to do the interviews all over again in English or in Spanish. And also some of the things that you lose in translation, because sometimes you're not going to get it, and you have to accept that, once you do an interview once, if you do it a second time, the person might not have the same emotion the second time they're telling you. And so those are all things that are part of being a bilingual journalist that, again, it's still always an advantage to be bilingual, don't get me wrong. But, you sort of kind of like think to yourself sometimes, I could have done this for, and then what other questions to ask yourself is, what language does my interviewee speak, and what language should I start the interview with? And those are all, again, it's a part of the art. Right? Again, no hard and fast rules. It's just something that comes with experience, but those are definitely questions you need to ask yourself so that you can make that person feel more comfortable and also realize and be aware of what their reaction will be depending on what language you're talking to them in. So those are all really important things to keep in mind. So one of those stories is a story that I personally love. It's about Violeta. I don't know if anybody here is of Cuban descent, but there's a very well-known cologne of violet scent that from the most Cuban families, from the time a child is born, when they're a baby, until probably preteen or well into adolescence, they will douse their kids in, and it's Violeta cologne, violet cologne. This story I did first in Spanish, and then I translated it into English. And I think that, if I remember correctly, because now my memory is fuzzy, the person who I interviewed, luckily, is bilingual. So I was able to do that same story at the same time, without having to go back a second time, right? And I was able to do it in English and in Spanish. His primary language, believe it or not, even though he's of Cuban descent, he's a third-generation Cuban, so his primary language is English. And so I did it in English first, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I want to show you how the story went, so then we can talk about the differences because of language.
Gracias, Luis. Hablemos ahora de una esencia que quizás usted tenga en su casa, porque nos ha acompañado a varias generaciones de cubanos donde quiera que estemos.
Nathalia Ortiz nos lleva a conocer a los creadores de esa inconfundible fragancia que usan incluso algunos famosos.
Así es, Fausto, Daisy. Los frascos de colonia de la popular fragancia de violetas es elaborada por más de 10 marcas y frecuentemente acaparan una estantería entera en las farmacias en Miami. Pero entre tantas opciones hay una que inició la costumbre cubana, la cual ha pasado de generación en generación. Si te acercas a un bebé de ascendencia cubana, lo más probable es que sentirás el aroma de violetas. Violetas, violetas, violetas. Una marca fue la que comenzó esta tradición en Cuba hace 90 años y pertenece a una familia, la de su fundador, Agustín Reyes.
Nosotros lo que hicimos es hacer uno tan bueno y de la misma calidad que lo que había en el mercado mundial, pero hecho en Cuba.
Reyes lleva el mismo nombre de su padre y de su abuelo, quien fundó la compañía en La Habana en el año 1927. Él es quien hoy maneja la empresa familiar desde su planta en Hialeah.
Si alguien hoy huele una fragancia y dice, eso es viejo. Nadie le dice eso a la violeta porque es limpio, fresco, y gustado igual hoy que en el año 27.
En el año 1960, poco después de llegar el castrismo a la isla, su familia huyó, llevándose clandestinamente la fórmula original de la colonia de violetas que los había hecho tan exitosos. Y consiguieron que el aroma de Cuba siguiera perfumando a los bebés en el exilio.
Es casi como pasta de dientes para los cubanos, todo el mundo lo usa, no es para el rico, no es para el pobre, todo el pueblo lo usa.
Desde cubanoamericanos famosos como Gloria y Emilio Estefan, quienes según Reyes compran la fragancia por cajas, a la actriz Eva Méndez, quien ha incluido esta colonia entre su lista de artículos favoritos. Estas niñas, hijas de cubanos, a pesar de ser casi adolescentes, la siguen usando como su propia madre.
Tenemos make-up y tenemos todo lo que las mujeres tenemos en las carteras. Parte de eso es también tener mi colonia de violetas, Agustín Reyes.
¿Qué crees que diría tu abuelo si estuviera vivo todavía y viera cómo has podido mantener la compañía?
Eso es difícil. Creo que estaría con...
Okay. As you can see, he got very emotional at the end, right? And so now I remember exactly what happened. I did that interview first in Spanish because I was working for Telemundo that day, and then I was going to offer the English version to NBC if they wanted it. I wasn't sure if they did. So my primary responsibility that day was the Spanish language content. So therefore, I did the interview first in Spanish because I knew he was going to get choked up. He's not going to get choked up twice. Once he knew what I was going to ask him in English, he was just going to answer it, and that's exactly what happened. I did the same story in English. I'm not going to go through and show it to you because I want to leave more room for questions. But basically, the story remained the same. It was basically a straight translation in English. And then at the end, I ask him the same question, and he answers it very naturally, and it was very sweet, but you lose that. So those are things to keep in mind. Again, also, if you're a bilingual journalist and you're going to do the same story in 2 different languages, you need to know, what is it you want? You need to prioritize. What language is the most important that day? Because you can't have it all. Okay? How do I go to the next slide here? Yeah, so that was the English version. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about is sometimes, another thing that happens, and this is actually very close to home for you guys because this happened a week and a half ago. One of your fraternities was suspended. There was some stuff going on. And so I came and did the story for NBC6 that day. That day, NBC was my primary I was hired that day by NBC, and then I was doing something for Telemundo after, right? So what happened was I made the English language interviews my priority that day. However, one of my interviewees was bilingual. So it was a student, and I stopped him and I asked him about fraternities and has he ever been a part of one, the whole thing. I asked him the same thing in Spanish. What happened was I ended up using the English sound bites anyway in both of my stories. The one for Telemundo and the one for NBC. Why, you ask? Why would you do that? Because he felt more comfortable speaking to me in English. And I got more of an authentic reaction. I got more of the body language, the natural, that relays what you want to see. I got more of an impactful response from him in his native tongue. And that's what usually happens. Now, I could have, for the audience's sake, to make it easier for them, I just went and I translated his soundbite from English to Spanish. I could have left his Spanish language soundbite that said basically the same thing, but it didn't say it in the same way. And so another thing that I want to emphasize is that it's not just about the language, the actual words being used, but body language and tone and facial expressions and getting choked up like this guy did, that's universal. And that's something that you don't even need to explain to the audience. Even if my grandmother would have been watching that story, who knows no English, she would still get, with the help of my translation, the fact that this student felt a certain way. And I think it would have been, and again, that's a call you have to make. That's a creative decision. I mean, somebody else could walk up here and say the exact opposite thing, but that was my creative decision that day because I felt like his soundbite was better and it relayed what he was saying better than if I would have gone and translated it, used his Spanish language version. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
FIU fraternity suspended under investigation after offensive messages posted in a group chat were made public. NBC6 reporter Nathalia Ortiz is live at FIU with more on this. And Nathalia, what kind of messages are we talking about here?
Jawan, we're talking about anti-Semitic jokes, rape jokes, questions about how to buy certain drugs. But the most egregious of all these allegations, according to university officials, are the sharing of nude photos of women without their consent. Tau Kappa Epsilon, better known on campus as TEAC, is making headlines today after FIU officials temporarily suspended the fraternity while they investigate the group and about 10 of its members. Among other things, they're accused of sharing nude photos of women without their consent via an internal chat group of more than 30 male students.
Some of the posts on there, a couple of the women that are in the photos came forward and self-identified and said they did not give permission for those to be released.
According to this university official, the offensive chat messages, which also included anti-Semitic remarks, drug buying questions, possible evidence of hazing, and rape comments, were brought to FIU's attention in July by an anonymous emailer. But Lunsford claims they were not able to identify the people involved until this month. Meanwhile, Jose Suarez, a former TEAC member, reacts to the news of the nude photos.
They shouldn't be doing that. But as for the other things, as for the comments, and I think it's just a little weird because those things should stay private. Not condoning what they said, just saying certain things are amongst friends.
So what about the rape comments?
Oh, I don't know. I never saw that.
They were rape comments. So do you think that that's something that should be held amongst
I don't know. That's a little weird. I wouldn't do that.
We reached out to TEAC's headquarters and got the following statement. Tau Kappa Epsilon and our Sigma Alpha chapter at FIU are fully cooperating with university officials on their investigation. Lunsford says complaints have been filed against the students and the organization with the Student Conduct and Resolution Office and University Police.
Once those investigations are completed, we'll determine what type of sanctions we will place against the fraternity and maybe individuals involved in the fraternity.
And the fraternity's tagline is "Better Men for a Better World," which makes it quite ironic that they are now facing these allegations. That was the student that I was talking about. When I did the story later on in Spanish, NBC6 News. Back to you. I'm going to show you.
Escuchen esto. Mujeres desnudas, así como comentarios sexuales y racistas, fueron encontrados en ciertos mensajes de una fraternidad de FIU.
La Universidad Internacional de la Florida decidió suspender a esa fraternidad de estudiantes. Nathalia Ortiz hizo una investigación y nos cuenta lo que ha encontrado. Natalia.
Estamos hablando de unos 10 estudiantes, todos hombres, quienes hoy enfrentan acusaciones de compartir mensajes ofensivos por medio de un grupo de chat, pues por sus celulares, y también por compartir fotos de mujeres desnudas sin su consentimiento. El grupo Tau Kappa Epsilon, mejor conocido a los estudiantes de FIU como TIC, ha figurado en titulares hoy, después que la organización y aproximadamente 10 de los miembros de esta fraternidad estudiantil está siendo investigada por, entre otras cosas, compartir fotos de mujeres desnudas sin su consentimiento a través de un chat interno, donde participaban más de 30 estudiantes hombres. Algunos de los posts ahí, algunas de las mujeres se identificaron y dijeron que no habían dado permiso para que fueran divulgadas. Según el oficial de la universidad, los mensajes chat, los cuales también incluían comentarios antisemitas, preguntas sobre la compra de drogas y chistes sobre la violación a mujeres, fueron reportados en julio por un email anónimo. Lunsford alega que no habían podido identificar las personas involucradas hasta este mes. Mientras tanto, José Suárez, un antiguo miembro de una fraternidad, reacciona a la noticia de las fotos desnudas. No deben estar haciendo eso, pero en cuanto a lo otro, comentarios, es un poco extraño porque esas cosas deben quedarse en privado. No estoy excusándolos, pero ¿qué tal estos comentarios sobre la violación? Pregunto yo. Oh, eso es extraño, eso no lo haría. Los directivos de la fraternidad emitieron el siguiente.
To show you there was that I used the same soundbite in the same language because I felt like he expressed himself much better. If you would have seen, and probably should have brought you the bite, but I didn't even have it because I didn't use it. The same question, or the answer to the same question in Spanish, he was very short, he was very brief, he didn't really emote too much, there wasn't too much going on with his body. So I chose to use the same one, even though I could have very easily used the Spanish language version. So I was telling you before, some of the challenges are style differences. I want to just also put it out there that things to keep in mind if you want to choose one language over the other, you know, if you're bilingual and you have that option, is that English language salaries are reportedly higher in media when you work in an English language station than in a Spanish language station. Again, that may vary. That may not necessarily be your case. But I'm just putting it out there that that's sort of like what is reported. Unless you work for a place where you'll have to turn stories in both languages on a regular basis, you usually won't be paid more just because you're bilingual. And that may be something that we should work to change. And I am one of those people who are kind of adamant about it because I feel like we do add more value to a company when we can do that job in 2 languages, you know, at the drop of a dime. However, it's not the case right now. So it's a reality that I just wanted to put out there as well. And let's see, yeah, it may be challenging or take time to secure a job in the other language after you've been working in one. That goes back to what I was saying before about why it's important to establish yourself in your primary language first for 2 to 3 years, because it can be challenging after that if you start backwards. Let's say if you happen to get a job in Spanish, but that's not your primary language, or where you really want to take your career long term, you maybe grow very good at it, and then nobody wants to let you go. And then it's hard for other news directors who only speak English to really fully understand that you are a primary English speaker. So, final remarks. So there's just a lot of stuff there that I think is kind of common sense. Branding yourself bilingual can be powerful, but it's not a free pass. So it doesn't mean that because you're bilingual, you get to be less of a journalist in other ways because you add all this value. I think it's important to always keep your journalistic integrity intact. You have to possess just as many news chops, if not more, because sometimes, unfortunately, there are news directors who may say you as not just so much here in South Florida, but elsewhere. They're not accustomed to seeing a Hispanic person who can speak English well. So there may be a little bit of racism, so I think it's just really important to be on your game with everything. And so that's a tremendous thing. The other thing I wanted to say is always ask for proofreading and always be prepared. Don't be ashamed of that. I think very few people, I don't even know anybody, who is fully bilingual to the point that both languages are exactly on the same level. I think there's always one language that is even slightly
comes slightly easier to the person. And so I think that's important to always check your work. Even in your primary language, you should be checking your work. And that's it. Let's open up the floor for questions. I know that there might be some questions here. I'm not sure if Lillian. So does anybody have questions? Yes.
Anybody has questions? I do. I just wanted to know, does someone at the station style you or like your outfits?
No. But we do have a consultant who comes in once a year, depending on the station you work at. The station we work at now, and the Telemundo stations that are owned and operated by Telemundo across the country, they have a consultant who comes in once a year and checks your work and gives you tips on what to wear and what not to wear, because there are some things that look good in life but don't look good on TV. There are patterns that are very busy and there can be a little dizzying on camera, etc. Colors, certain things like that, haircuts, etc. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned that you were a producer first.
Yes.
How was that transition from producer to reporter?
That's a great question. I think it was helpful to an extent, but if I could do it again, I would have probably started journalism sooner and not done so much of the production. Because I did the production for 7 years. I think it's good to do that maybe for 1 or 2 to kind of get your feet wet and get familiar. But if your end goal is to be on camera and be a journalist, then you need to start cracking with that as soon as possible. But yes, it definitely gave me a good idea of what goes on behind the scenes and how that affects, like how the whole operation works, you know. So it's not all about you because you're on camera. Like there's a team of people behind cameras who work very hard, just as hard as you do. They do different things, they perform different tasks, but it also gives you a level of respect for your peers, and I think that's important.
Yeah, being bilingual, does that give you an edge at interviews? Like, do companies look for more bilingual people, or do they they prefer a certain, either you're a native speaker for Spanish or English, or like, what's the benefit?
It depends. That's a great question. It really depends because I think that overall, if you ask a news director or somebody who's working at a company, at a media company, their answer would be, of course, we prefer people who are bilingual. Who doesn't? I mean, why would you, right? It's 2 for 1, right? But really, when you hire the person is when you find out how bilingual they are. And then you kind of find out, like, are they really as bilingual as I thought they were? And could I have just, you know, maybe they only hired you for that one thing and it turns out you're not that bilingual. They could have hired somebody else that had something else. You know, so it just depends. It's not, there's no... And also the other thing is, as a bilingual candidate, when you go into an interview, like I said before, you're not necessarily going to get paid more just because you're bilingual. I mean, you can use it as a negotiation tool for sure, and by all means, try and do, and I know I will continue to. But it's not set up that way yet. It's really not set up that way because a lot of news stations really will only use your bilingualism, if you will, once in a while. So when I'm at NBC, I mean, yes, I'm in South Florida and there's tons of bilingual stories I can do, but there are also all my other fellow reporters, you know, we're only turning around a story in English for NBC. It's when I have to do one for both Telemundo and NBC, which only happens once in a while, that it becomes like a thing that's really needed. Because truth be told, it is double the work, and sometimes I can't do 2. Sometimes I have to commit to just one and say, hey, I only have 8 hours in this workday. I can do your second story, but that might have to wait for another day if it's not like a timely story. So, you know, I mean, it's very fuzzy around the bilingual issue. Yeah. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Natalia, for being here. For our students, I know many of them here in this room, and they're about to graduate very soon. And you know how when you were a student, you know how you feel those months when graduation is approaching. So besides being nervous about, you know, your future in journalism, what do you recommend to young people who are trying to get a position in any kind. It doesn't have to be a reporter. It could be, any other position in the newsroom. What do you recommend to them?
I recommend taking full advantage of all the resources you have here at FIU to make a demo reel for yourself if you want to be on camera. If it's not behind camera, then getting all the experience you can as a print journalist and getting published as many articles as you can. If you're in PR, then doing whatever that entails. I'm not a PR major, so I don't know what that would mean, but you get the drift. It's taking advantage of your time here, because once you're out of here, you're going to have to do it on your own. And then either pay a photographer to do it for you or ask a friend for a favor, and then they are not available for 3 weeks, and then they go on a trip for 2 months, and then it's always like this waiting game. And if you really want to get out there quickly and with all that momentum that comes with graduating, I would definitely prepare a lot. And have your resume, even if you can do that, get a resume written up while you're here, the demo reel, anything you need to get a job. Like, those are just basic things. And so take full advantage of all the resources you have here with your professors, with counselors, with advisors, with whoever it is you need to do, or whatever it is you need to do to get that done. And what else? Not to be afraid to get advice. And it was a Christmas day, and I'll never forget it. And of course, I was super eager to work. I was, just getting my first opportunity to be on camera. I had been hired to be the weekend reporter there. And they said to me, you need to shadow so-and-so for 4 or 5 days before you go on. I said, fine. And that day, I remember going on a story that was very impactful to me and very emotional, because it was Christmas Day. There was a family, a very poor family whose house had burned down. They already had very little, and now they had even less in Alapata. And the woman was pregnant, and she had 3 kids, and she was by herself, and her whole house was burned down. And that day, I remember thinking, oh wow, like, I'm so blessed, first of all, like that I have it really put things into perspective about my life. And that's when I knew that, that I was. Sometimes when you work in news, I know you're exposed to a lot of bad news and bad situations, and some people may get a little jaded by that. But I also think that on the flip side, you can also turn it on the positive and say, this is something that'll teach you to be grateful. It also helps you not sugarcoat the world. You'll know the ugly reality of a lot of things that are going on out there that we're not really privy to when we're doing another type of job. And I think that that's not a bad thing, to really get a full, a deeper understanding of how the world works, even in its ugliness, And that day I realized that that's what I wanted to do because of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Hi.
Hi.
What is the biggest difference you've seen between the Spanish station and the English station, if any?
Yeah, there are some differences. I feel like a lot of the Spanish language stations are obviously filled with people who are coming from other countries and whose native tongue is Spanish. And so they all come from different countries because we're in the United States, right? They're not just from one. So they all come with different expectations and different styles of doing journalism. And so they have to funnel through and figure out how it's done here. So there's an adjustment period, and I feel like they're a little more open to, how would I say this? They're a little more open to doing things perhaps in a non-traditional way in journalism, whereas I think that the general market stations, so the English language stations, they do things a certain way, and that's what's worked for them, and because they're not constantly having this influx of people coming in from other countries, really they don't have to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So I think that that's one of the things that I've noticed is a difference. But really all in all, we work pretty much in the same manner. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. I know you mentioned earlier about, if they may call you in for a parade, using those type of examples. But if you're a newbie to, journalism, that wouldn't apply for us, right? Aren't we usually supposed to raise our hand for everything, or can that still apply for, someone who's newly hired?
No, you're right. It doesn't. When that actually happened to me, I was called in for a Thanksgiving Day parade at the last minute, and I already had Thanksgiving plans with my family. But I had already been in the industry, for about 6 years, and so I had the leverage. And I also had, enough time in that company that they knew how committed I was and how much how many times I had said yes before that, before you say no. So yes, definitely, you know, it doesn't apply to everybody at every stage of their career. It's more of an example of the fact that you do have to have some kind of balance. That balance may not be struck at the beginning of your career because you are going to be very eager to say yes a lot. But I also encourage you, and here's another thing, because I was just having this conversation with a journalist who's been around for maybe 3 or 4 years the other day, and you know, she was telling me it took her about a year in the current job she's at to understand that she could say no, because they were kind of taking advantage of her and having her work 12-hour shifts a lot during the week. And she already worked the morning shift, which starts at 3 a.m. So imagine working from 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. You have no life. And yes, you can do that once, twice, maybe once or twice a month, things like that. But when it becomes, and this even for those of you who are starting out, when there is really something that is egregiously, and you know it's egregious and it's not healthy and it's not right, you should stand up and say something. And so finally when she did, they said, oh, okay, then we won't do that anymore. And they didn't, and that was okay. You know, so I think you need to learn how to find your voice and your confidence, and that does come with time, and I know it's hard when you're starting out, but it is possible, and you should do it. Because like I said, I mean, you can say yes and volunteer to be the one that's there every day for 13 hours for a while, but it's going to take a toll on you, and you're not going to put out your best work anyway. Right. And that's just the truth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Nathalia.
Hi.
My question is, have you ever had a PR crisis in the station? And if you have, how was your first reaction to it?
I don't know that we've had a PR crisis at the station. I think that I will reference a PR crisis that sort of happened at Telemundo New York station and NBC in New York, where I used to work. It was after I had left, but it made news, even national news, because they were participating, as we always did, in the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And then there was some controversy there because the person that the committee of the parade was choosing to honor was a very controversial figure who some people had said was responsible for some deaths and terrorism, and other people said he was a hero. And there were all these people on both sides of that. That ended up becoming such a big deal that both our stations ended up pulling out of that parade, and other stations in New York as well. That was a PR crisis in the fact that now you're associated with this situation. And I wasn't there, so it's not exactly answering your question because I really haven't experienced a PR crisis where I've been, but I just remember thinking, wow, like we do have to be really careful when we are journalists. And even as news stations, sometimes we're asked to go out and host events, MC events, things such as this, for example. I mean, this is something that has no controversy and is completely, I love doing it because this is my alma mater, and that's fine. But there are some times where we're asked to host specific galas of organizations and nonprofits, and you're not really sure. Really, to be honest, like how do you know? You can't possibly know all of the inner workings of that organization, and if they're completely ethical and they're completely doing everything that they promise with the money. And so I think that we have to be very careful with that, so that we don't fall into a PR crisis if that organization is dragged into one, because it is our face and our name. The way they reacted at that point, I think, was the right way to pull out and say, you know what, we're not going to do the parade because it's going to make us look bad. And I think it was the right decision. But that was obviously not a decision on the reporters' behalf. I mean, excuse me, on the reporters of their own volition. It was something that happened, that management decided. So.
And I noticed you mentioned something about the accents. Does the company require you to have a neutral accent, like, for example, in Spanish?
I think that they would prefer, especially if you're starting out, it's kind of like they would prefer you fit the mold, in every way, with your image, with your hair, with your dress, with your manner. So I think that at the beginning, yes, maybe you maybe want to neutralize a bit, but I think that as you become more confident with your news skills and with your reporting skills, and once they get to know you more and who you really are authentically, I think it's okay to loosen up and use a certain word that you know, and that won't be misinterpreted, of course, in another country. But I do think it's important to bring your own personality out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I've been looking into jobs because we're graduating, and I feel like there's been a shift in a lot of TV jobs toward more freelance and per diem jobs, and as you know, someone who's alone in Miami, how would you recommend, or how have you seen the industry shift? And like, if they're offering full-time positions, are they just hiring you for projects and then letting you go? So how has that worked out for you?
Well, in what industry specifically? In news or in TV
News and TV production. And you mentioned you were freelance after all these years. So how has that like been for you?
So it's been hard. It's been hard because it's the first time I'm a freelance journalist. I freelanced as a producer before, back in the day before my transition into journalism. And here, I think what's happened is that, I mean, it's a number of things. It's also sort of my own choice that I've been freelance, so I can't fully, you know, I can relate, but I also, it's because of a personal situation. I've decided not to go on full time. And that may change. I don't know that the industry is changing and that they're offering more freelance than before, but I think that perhaps at the beginning of your career, it's a way that they get to try you out before fully committing to you. And I think that it's more common at that stage. And sometimes later, like in my situation, because you know, I made a transition from New York to Miami, and I had been there for 10 years. They didn't really know me here. And so I'm a mom. I wanted to spend more time with my child. So it kind of worked out for all of us. And in your case as well, because you're new, and also for you, it may not be a bad situation because you may want to try the company and see if it works for you. It's a two-way street as well, you know, in that relationship. But of course, I understand the concern may be that you're not going to have benefits, you don't know what your income is going to be, what your schedule is going to be, and all of those things. So I don't want to discourage you, and I think that, you know, at your stage, if you can get a freelance job, take it and build on that, and it'll be something more you can put on your resume. And then, but keep shopping. Like, don't stop looking for work. Take what you can get, and then simultaneously look for other things, and then use that to catapult you to the next thing. Yeah. Let me see if there's anybody who had let's see. Okay, Melissa online. Are we out of time? No? So, yes, we are. Okay. No. Okay, so you tell me. Okay. Okay. So sorry if I couldn't make everybody's questions. I know there were some people online that had some questions that we didn't get to. My final thoughts are that I think it's important to get as many tools in your toolbox as possible. And so if that means being bilingual, and if you have the gift that at home you were taught Spanish, and you can improve that, excel in that, make yourself more proficient in that language, then it will be better for you, not just in South Florida, but across the country. I think it's something that, yes, somebody had asked me, you know, is it news directors, do they ask if you're bilingual? Is that, but yes, it definitely makes you a much more appealing candidate. It doesn't mean you're going to get the job, and it doesn't mean there's any guarantees versus other candidates, but it does mean that it's one more notch on your belt. So just like, you know, it may be one more notch on your belt that you've already published things, or you've already had something on some website posted. That is, I think, even more important than that. So I would encourage you to do that, to explore those options and figure out if that's something that's of interest to you, and then go and do it. You're welcome.